Porkus. I'm not much of a writer. I'm terrified for my life, and I don't even know who I'm writing this for, but I have to put these words down. Let me start over. Let me start at the beginning. My younger years were not exactly happy ones. My mom had problems. Drugs. I often found myself alone in what we were calling a home at the time, or in a car in a strange parking lot. One night, when I was about 5, I'm guessing, she left me alone in her crap green station wagon, the kind with the fake wood paneling. I was tiny and it was huge. Even if it wasn't for the events that began that night, my little brain would have remembered it vividly. I was barely more than a baby, but I have memories dating back further. It's a little unusual, but not unheard of, especially for kids that suffered early childhood trauma and neglect. It was cold and foggy. I think we were living in Port Angeles at the time. It's right on the ocean in the Pacific Northwest, so cold, wet, and foggy were pretty common. I don't remember what my mom told me she was doing. I just remember that she told me to wait in the car, don't open the door for anyone, and that she'd be right back. She had parked under a streetlight. I only remember that because the light was on the fritz and periodically flicked on and off. I also remember that she was gone for a long time, long enough for me to have been worrying for a while. My little breath was starting to steam up the windows as time went on. I occupied my time flipping through my tiny collection of battered baseball cards, but it was dark and the flickering light didn't much help. It was then that something large walked past the car, really close. At first I thought it was just a flickering street lamp, but I had felt something brush up against the puke green car paneling. The windows were steamed up and beating with moisture. It was impossible to see anything outside the car except large, vague shapes. I was about to use the sleeve of my tattered sweatshirt to wipe at the window when I felt something bump the car. No, more like shake it, with purpose. Someone was outside and it knew someone was inside. My heart beat painfully in my chest. I was just a little boy. It was all I could do not to pee myself. All my instincts screamed at me to stay as still and as silent as possible. Eventually it would go away. That's when I heard something scratching the surface of the car. A knife or something metallic was sliding along the car paneling, something really sharp. It was growing louder as it neared the passenger side door where I sat. I was so scared that I was certain whoever it was outside could hear my heart pounding and my short sips of panicked breath. I know now that I was on the verge of hyperventilating. I had no idea what I was experiencing then. I risked a look out the side window. Whatever it was outside the car was standing at the passenger door, just standing. Every time the streetlight flickered, its hulking silhouette was illuminated through the steamed-up window. Just then a rap came at the window, and I let out a little scream. I'd realized later that I had pissed myself. I shouldn't be embarrassed by this. I was just a little boy, but it's not a memory I like to dwell on. The rap at the window came again. I don't know why, but I reached out and wiped at the steamed window with the sleeve of my sweater so I could see who the person was. I'll never forget what I saw. Standing a few paces back from the door was something that was humanoid, but not quite human. A bipedal creature that was more wild boar than man. Its arms and legs were human. It stood erect like a man. The torso, the head, fully wild boar. Its feet were huge, shoeless, hairy, and gnarly. The nails were more claws than what you and I would expect on a humanoid hand. I was paralyzed with terror. What was this thing? What did it want? Why was it just staring at me with those beady pig eyes? I'll never forget those eyes. They stared at and through me, completely alien and unreadable. I have no idea how much time passed, me staring at the pig man in the flickering streetlight and it staring back at me. But every detail of its body has been seared into my memory. Its umber leathery skin, the massively muscled arms, its big pig-like belly, the oily leather pants, the constant sniffing of its snout, the clawed hands and feet, and the long, well-worn tusks that grew out from the side of its face. Who could ever forget something like that, even if it was glimpsed only for an instant? It was then that another car entered the parking lot on the far side from where I was trapped by the pigman. I looked hopefully in the car's direction as its headlights slid over the exterior of the station wagon and briefly illuminated the interior. Maybe Mom was inside. It was then that I turned back to the passenger window. I let out a little screech. The pigman was staring in at me, bent over, snout nearly touching the glass. The pigman's beady eyes stared directly at me. There was no mistaking the homicidal menace in those eyes. I watched as it held up its clawed hand, and it ticked off a count of 3 with its fingers. With the other hand, it made a slicing motion across its bloated, leathery throat. The other car was inching closer. I dared a look out of a half-moon of clear glass out the front window of the car, down where the window met the dashboard. Suddenly, the pigman banged on the passenger window to get my attention back. Its snout let out a blast of air. It was loud and primal and immediately steamed up the window from the outside. I could no longer see the pigman. Was the nightmare over? Was he just going to go away, fade away into the mist and flickering darkness of the night? I was panting and could see the little puffs of breath I was making, but I couldn't take my eye off the steamed-up window. Just then, one of its huge fingers dragged down the window, screeching as it wrote the number 1. And then it was over. My mom showed up not long after that and scolded me for peeing myself. I was too scared to talk to her about what I saw. I never told her about it. But I never looked at those baseball cards again, and I never let her leave me alone in the parking lot ever again. I would occasionally doodle the pigman on my schoolwork until my first-grade teacher, Miss Green, got concerned and had me talk to a counselor. The counselor asked me what the pigman was and why I needed to draw it so often. I was a tight-lipped little shit. I just shrugged and said, "I don't know. It's just Porkus." I repressed my memory for years. It wasn't too long after that my grandparents got custody of me, and not too much longer after that I lost my mom to whatever drugs she spent all her time and money on. Doodling Porkus abruptly halted. Years passed, and I grew into what I thought was a relatively normal adult with a family. I had a good job, and we owned our home. When I was 28, my now ex-wife and I lived in a split-level home just off the suburban beaten path in Redmond. We had a short driveway, and the house was surrounded by lots of trees. It was another wet, cold Pacific Northwest night. I had just taken the garbage cans out to the curb and was going about my normal evening routine of securing the house before heading to bed. My wife and little boy were already asleep. I was walking through the living room when I heard one of the cans, they were still made of galvanized metal back then, crash to the ground and the lid being banged about. It didn't sound like raccoons to me, so my thoughts went immediately to neighbor boys. I went to the darkened bay window of the living room that overlooked the driveway. I was more annoyed than anything until I saw what I thought I would never see again. Porkus, the pigman from my childhood. It shouldn't have been able to see me in the darkened window, but it was clearly staring directly up at me, holding a garbage can lid in one hand. More than 20 years had passed, but it looked exactly the same as it did that night in the parking lot. Surely it couldn't see me, I thought to myself. As if to answer my question, the creature kicked at the garbage strewn at its feet and beat the galvanized lid against the garbage can it had not knocked over. To make it perfectly clear that it could see me, it pointed at me with one clawed finger. Suddenly I was filled with the same paralyzing terror that had gripped me all those years ago when I was just a 5-year-old boy. What did this thing want? How did it find me? How was I going to protect my family from it? Fortunately, I was no longer a little boy. I stepped away from the bay window and returned to the front door. I turned on the floodlights that illuminated much of my yard. My wife and the handyman I had hired to do the install thought the lights were excessive. I knew they weren't. I double-checked to ensure the alarm system was activated. I had just walked to the interior perimeter of my home to ensure we were properly locked in for the evening, but I retraced my steps regardless. Finally, I found myself in the kitchen dialing 911. As I dialed, I heard an all-too-familiar rap on a nearby glass. I frantically searched the kitchen and adjoining dining room windows. A strange shape filled the corner of my eye, and my heart leapt into my chest. I turned in the direction of the shape, toward the sliding glass door. Standing just outside the door was Porkus. I nearly dropped the phone, and may have done just that had an operator not picked up at that moment. "Please state the nature of your emergency," came the female voice. I remember speaking, rushed and nervous, and telling the operator that there was a trespasser on my property. I told her I had reason to believe that he meant us harm, but I don't remember saying the words precisely. I was too transfixed on Porkus. He was no more than 5 feet in front of me. The only thing standing between him and me, and ultimately my family, was a thin pane of glass. The pigman was powerfully built. I had no doubt that it could easily break into my flimsy little fortress and tear me to shreds with those claws and tusks. It just stood there, staring at me with its beady eyes, radiating homicidal intent. And then it lifted a hand and ticked off a count of 3. Those fingers were every bit as big and clawed as I remembered from my childhood. Then it made a slashing motion with its other hand across its throat, exactly in the same manner as I remembered. Just as it did when I was a boy, it brought its snout to the glass and exhaled a loud, primal blast of air. A patch of glass steamed up. I stood there, staring at it. I was stammering, trying to answer the 911 operator's questions as the pigman drew 2 fingers down the fogged-up glass. I had no idea what it was trying to communicate. I fumbled through the conversation with the operator a few seconds longer and was assured an officer was on the way. But of course, by the time the officer arrived and my wife had been woken, the pigman had disappeared. I had no idea how to explain to them what had actually happened, that Porkus had returned. The truth was not an option. My need for security and overprotectiveness of my family blossomed into a full-blown disorder from that moment on. My wife forced me into therapy, but I could never really talk about what was happening. I knew that Porkus wanted to kill me, but why? What had it been doing in the intervening years? Why the fixation with the number 3? Would it harm my family when it finally did come for me? I never found out. My wife left me after a few years of unsuccessful counseling. I've grown apart from my only child over the last few decades. I'm 54 now. I'm writing this from my cabin on Lopez Island. I've been holed up here with my bug-out bag and a shotgun I don't really know how to use, sitting by the back door of the cabin for the last few days. I saw Porkus again at my condo in Westlake. I watched him through the security camera. He stared right into the camera. How he knew it was mine or that I'd watched the video is beyond me, but he did. He held up 3 clawed fingers and made the throat-slashing gesture. I had plenty of time over the decades to come to understand what he was telling me. He would visit me 3 times. On the 3rd visit, he would kill me. The visit at Westlake was the last time he would come at me and let me live. It took next to no time after watching that video for me to grab my bug-out bag and hop from Seattle to Lopez on a charter plane. I have no idea why the pigman has haunted me all these years, or if it does the same to others. Its motivations are its own. I just know that typing these words may be my last act before he comes for me. Maybe this laptop will survive Porkus's attack on me and someone will find this document. Maybe it could help someone else who may be tormented by this monster. Regardless, it's written, and I doubt I'll ever write anything ever again. Wait. What was that sound? Is something rapping on the window of the front door?